Positive Moves presents Where Will the Money Go? Following the investment trail in emerging markets. An event that looked at emerging nations' economic prospects, challenges and emerging opportunities.
Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for your presence today. Essentially, what we're seeing is talent moving seamlessly across borders. Indian talent has been a very significant success story. Possibly, India is the only market which one could say is surplus to a certain extent on leadership and exports a lot of leadership. In our journey thus far, we came across an Indonesia 7 years ago, which had the fourth largest population in the world, phenomenal amount of poverty, massive corruption, significant earthquakes, but was a sure-shot recipe for growth. Today, we see that possibly being one of the most active markets as far as capital, financial, and human goes. Turkey, we saw as a market, was adding the highest number of megawatts in terms of energy anywhere in the world. Again, a predictor to us of potential growth. Australia had a very significant two-paced economy with at one stage $500 billion being poured in as FDI. Fascinating but highly dependent on resources and, as I said, two-paced. As this went along, we came across a book called Breakout Nations, which beautifully summarized what was going on in each of these markets, and that was something we were witnessing on the ground.
Chairing the event was D. Shivakumar, Senior Vice President and Managing Director, India, Middle East and Africa Region, Nokia, who set the tone for the evening, talking about what the new normal insofar as India and emerging markets are concerned.
All my life I've worked in emerging markets and currently cover a number of countries in emerging markets. So my experience and what I have really seen is what I'm going to discuss here today. First, there is no definition of an emerging market. Okay? In the 70s, they labeled it as less economically developed nations. In the 80s, they called it emerging markets. In the 90s, Jim O'Neill of Goldman Sachs called it BRIC. But the beauty is, whichever country you go to, especially in Africa and Far East, everybody wants to be an emerging market. So there is a nice tag to it, even though there is no proper definition to it. So any government official you meet in the whole of Africa, he says we are an emerging market. So somewhere, being an emerging market is seen as a ticket to something. The second question, why are emerging markets important to companies, specifically multinational companies? The biggest one is access. Market access is the reason a number of people are chasing emerging markets, because a number of these markets today are closed to a number of things. Okay? Where is the access coming? And this access always comes at a price. Access doesn't come free in emerging markets. The Western companies and the financial markets expect predictability. The street rewards predictability, predictable results. Okay, you said this, guidance was this, you are on top of it. However, emerging markets, companies are attracted by the vitality, young population, booming growth, etc., but are very worried about the volatility. Okay? You take a simple bus strike, you take a simple lorry strike, you take anything, your results go for a 6. So the volatility of emerging markets worries many a person. But the vitality of emerging markets is what is really attractive to investors. And finally, my last point on my lessons from emerging markets is emerging markets is the attractiveness of the market. That's why a multinational company gets in there. But I think the company in that country also needs to ask some very important questions. Why does this company in this country matter to the global corporation? Suppose we have a company in Ethiopia or we have a company in Kenya. Why is Kenya important? What capabilities does it have so that it continues to be attractive from a company perspective? I believe the first will always be business results. If your business results are good, the corporate will always invest, no doubt about it. The second is talent, people talent. That's the other thing which companies will want to leverage. Okay, so that's the other capability that the local country must have. And the third capability that the local company must have in order to be attractive to the parent company in emerging markets is what I call unique differentiators. What is a unique business model in an Ethiopia or a Kenya or in an India that the global company can learn and spread that elsewhere. Okay, those are the three things which are very important. So for a local company to flourish and continue to get investment, okay, they must produce strong results, their people must be of a high caliber, and finally, the uniqueness of that market. How can they leverage those learnings as a company in many other markets so that that company is more successful?
Wow, अपनी गाड़ी में पिकनिक! Thanks, पापा!
ये स्टेट बैंक ऑफ इंडिया कार लोन्स का कमाल है, सिर्फ 1683 पर लाख के EMI.
That's so affordable. नहीं तो पहले buying a car was so expensive, ना?
For affordable car loans, visit your SBI branch today.
मेरा Voltas all-weather AC, इसका InstaCool compressor और Super Dust Guard active dehumidifier and intelligent heating दे comfort all year round.
Behind the success of every winner will lie your vote. So, vote now. To cast your vote, log on to bollywood100.co.in.
Bollywood at 100, presented by Samsung Galaxy Grand. Smartphone experience redefined. Powered by Green Lamb Laminates. Zamane ko sajana hai. In association with Lloyd LED Televisions and Nano. Print partner DNA.
This week on Young Turks, we showcase the young finalists of the 2013 Sankalp Social Enterprise Awards, an Intellicast initiative that recognizes and supports innovative, sustainable and high-impact social enterprises.
Government offers Anganwadis. These Anganwadis are free, but they largely run as daycare centers.
We are able to now erect houses 80% faster than the conventional way of constructing homes.
Our target is to make Axistat as a mandatory first aid intervention for controlling bleeding in all first aid kits by 2018.
At these times only on CNBC TV 18.
Young Turks, brought to you by Maruti Suzuki Swift and Carrier Inverter Air Conditioner.
Overdrive, presented by Servo, world-class lubricants from Indian Oil. Add Servo, add life. In association with Samsung Galaxy Grand and AMCAT.
There are two ends of technology. One where it's built. The other where it works. From wind turbines that light up people's homes, to healthcare innovations that help save lives. At GE, we know our technology truly works when it works for India.
The keynote speaker for the evening was Richesh Sharma, Head of Emerging Markets and Global Macro Morgan Stanley Investment Management and author of the international bestseller Breakout Nations, in search of the next economic miracles.
What I find, though, really interesting when I look back at these 20 years, is that how 20 years ago no one was really that interested in what was happening in the rest of the world back here in India. And since then, it's fascinating to see how things have moved. There is no other economy and no other stock market in the world which is as linked to global trends as India. And this I find to be absolutely fascinating. So if you look at the Indian stock market for one, the correlation of the Indian stock market to the other emerging markets is the highest of any emerging market in the world. If I were to show you those two graphs of India versus rest of the emerging markets, you couldn't tell the difference. The correlation is more than 0.9, which basically suggests that the graphs are completely similar. That's on the stock market front. Now look at the economy. That India really started to first liberalize it. I think this is something which is a bit underappreciated by the general audience, that India started to first liberalize not in 1991, but in 1981.
India had a balance of payments crisis in 1981. We had a terrible 1970s. And then we had a balance of payments crisis in 1981. We went to the IMF. At that point in time, India went and took the largest loan that any country had ever taken from the IMF. And the first seeds of decontrol were sown back then. Because in return for that IMF assistance, we had to do a number of things, which is about cutting down on some of the import barriers, on some of the controls that we had, which were shackling the economy. And India's growth rate till then was about 3.5% on average between 1950 to 1980. From 1980 onwards, India's growth rate jumped up to an average of about 5.5% or so. So the entire decade of 1980s was the first decade of acceleration in India's economic growth rate. But the model wasn't quite sustainable because a lot of it was still dependent on the government, even though we were opening up, and a lot of government stimulus was put into work to get India to grow at 5.5% or so. And that is what led to the balance of payments crisis in 1991 and the second wave of reforms which took place in India. And of course, those were the really big bang reforms which took place in India and put India on a more sustainable growth track. But the interesting thing is that India's growth rate accelerated from 1981 onwards. So if you look at the rankings of India, it's quite fascinating again. There are about 150 odd emerging markets for which we have data, and the IMF puts this together. Of the 150 odd emerging markets, India's rank in growth terms in the 1980s was about 24 of the 180 economies in the world. 35 are developed economies, 150 are emerging markets. Of the 150 emerging markets, India's growth rank in the 1980s was about 24, 25 or so. In the 1990s, India's rank was also about 24, 25 or so. Last decade, India's rank amongst all emerging markets was what? 24, 25 or so. So India has consistently grown at a pace which is linked to other emerging markets. But there are two very sort of interesting points out here which I find. One, that even though we carried out these big bang reforms in 1991, there was no acceleration in India's growth rate throughout the entire 1990s. That India, the average growth rate of India in the 1990s was also 5.5% or so, the same as the 1980s. But something changed in the year 2003. That in the year 2003, magically, India started to grow at a pace of over 8% or so. And it sustained that pace for much of that decade. So the key thing is what happened in 2003. In 2003, two or three things happened together. One, that emerging markets had a pretty poor 1980s and 1990s. A lot of serial crises were there. From 94, it started off in Mexico, and then you had the Russian crisis, the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, and in the early 2000s you had the crisis in Argentina, and then Brazil, Turkey. So a lot of crises happened. And then a lot of these emerging markets were basically catching up for the poor performance that they had put in the past decade or so. So that's what sort of started off the boom in 2003. It was catch up. And the second very important factor, that's the year that a lot of easy money started to flow out of US and Europe. And especially out of the US, as the Fed pursued an extremely aggressive monetary policy to try and lift all these economies, and lift its own economy rather, after the TMT bubble burst. So you had a lot of easy money which was flowing out of these countries. So this combination of very easy money and the fact that you had some catch up for the poor performance of the past decade is what led to this Levitation Act, where almost every emerging market benefited. For me, therefore, the breakout nations concept is which economies will do better than expectations and better than other economies in the same income class over the next 3 to 5 years or so.
Yes Bank presents India Design Forum 2013, a platform to connect global and Indian designers to discuss ideas that can shape the world.
The India Design Forum makes an attempt
to sensitize the Indian society about the various aspects of design.
Watch the India Design Forum 2013 at these times only on CNBC TV 18.
Our partners. Television partner CNBC TV 18. Challenge the limits in the all-new Safari Storm, the real SUV.
2nd April 2011, World Cup Cricket Cup final match. Our 3 wickets were down and the target was still far away. The experts would have told me to go with an informed batsman, but I had other ideas. Because to be successful, you have to be different. McDowell's #1 Platinum Soda, the #1 spirit of leadership.
Power and beauty are at your fingertips now. Subscribe to the Forbes India magazine and you could drive home a brand new Volvo S60. SMS Forbes to 51818.
Overdrive, presented by Servo, world-class lubricants from Indian Oil. Add Servo, add life. In association with Samsung Galaxy Grand and AMCAT.
Listen to that inner voice. Follow your heart. Embrace every possibility. Step out with Samsonite.
The forum following the investment trail in emerging markets gave the dais a chance to question the keynote speaker, Ruchir Sharma, on his address.
So, Ruchir, before we open up the Q&A to everyone in the hall, I have a question for you. Based on this book, which is so deeply personal and you put in so much hard work into it, what's the best compliment or review you've got on the book, and what's the worst, and how did you deal with both?
Well, so far, like the reviews have been decent. I think that for me, the single biggest thing which has been gratifying, that it's a commercial success.
Okay.
Because I think that there are too many people, like especially in the world of academics and people like me. Now, let me tell you one thing: books don't make you money, right? So I mean, unless you're J.K. Rowling or something, books don't make you money. But what many people like in my industry or many academics or people like saying is the fact that as long as you get good reviews in the newspapers, etc., you have achieved your goal. And to me, that was never the idea. I wanted the book to be a commercial success. For whatever it's worth, I will mention this in this book, but I can tell it now because enough time has elapsed, that I always said that all the royalties of the book will go to charity, which are due to me. But I want the book to be a commercial success. I want it to be on the bestsellers list for one reason, that I want people to read it. So the best compliment for me is the fact that it has done okay commercially, and the fact that I've had people come up to me, especially like some people, and say this is the first economic book that I've read because it was accessible. So to me, that's been the compliment.
So, Ruchir, among the 150 so-called emerging markets, which would be in current context the top 2 or 3 that you would rate in terms of breakout nations and the hottest investment destinations?
Well, I think Southeast Asia is coming back. I think Southeast Asia suffered a lot from China's devaluation in 94. but Southeast Asia is making a real comeback. So I'd say some of those economies are, like, to me, like pretty good. Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines appear quite good. I think that some countries in Eastern Europe represent interesting value. Turkey's been doing quite well. I think that some of these economies like Poland, etc., may also do well. There are pockets of Africa, such as Nigeria, also, which could do well. But I think that the problem is, I think that this whole concept of BRICS is so last decade. That this was something which worked last decade, expectations got inflated, and those expectations are now being beaten down. I think that's the problem with those markets.
After the panelists had their opportunity to question Ruchir Sharma, the audience got a chance to quiz him on emerging markets, economic prospects, challenges and opportunities.
Vikram of HSBC, would you like to ask your question, please?
So, Ruchir, excellent speech today. Thank you so much. With so much liquidity in the market, one would imagine that some asset bubbles would be in the making. So, what do you think would be the asset bubbles? When's the signal that the bubble is going to burst? Any comments there?
Well, I'm not quite sure. This liquidity argument is a bit sort of, I think, exaggerated. That yes, there's a lot of money which is floating about there, but a lot of it is getting stuck at the banks. So look at what's happening like in India. We speak about tons of liquidity out there, but why is the rupee sort of still at 54, 55? Why is the current account deficit at 4% of GDP and you're not being able to fund it fully all the time? Like, there's no increase in foreign exchange reserves which is taking place in India anymore, like it was. It's because a lot of this liquidity by the central banks, the banks in turn, the financial institutions, whether it's got to do in the US or Europe, they're not lending that forward. So I think the liquidity is not as plentiful as we think it is. And so I'm not that concerned about asset bubbles. Yes, there is a slight scope that some of these economies which are doing well, there could be asset bubbles in those because people are always chasing stuff which is doing well. And in this regard, therefore, if you look at some of the markets I mentioned like Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, or in Latin America, Peru, Colombia, they're all now starting to trade at a premium compared to other markets. So those markets may see a liquidity bubble because people chase the few growth stories which are still doing well. But I don't think there's a generalized liquidity issue in the world because a lot of the liquidity that central banks are creating is not getting lent forward.
Okay, Anuj Joshi, you had a question, please.
Yeah, I actually also saw O'Neill on TV and then I read his comment. So he's the gentleman who started the whole BRICS movement.
Right.
Anyway, so he talked about the fact that China is growing faster and so on and so forth, but that India is not really a true breakout nation according to him. Chances are not even 50-50 according to him. And he talks about why China will succeed where India will fail is primarily because they have adapted to the fact that they've gone on a growth trajectory and they have figured out how to plan for the demographic changes which they're going to go through and so on and so forth, whereas India sort of believes that the world owes it a living and an 8% growth.
Well, these are very subjective takes in terms of how they'll do. I'm equally concerned about China today because I think that China, the debt levels and like in China today are extremely high. Like I just wrote this piece of the Wall Street Journal, in fact, a few days ago, saying that China has its own debt bomb. So I'm equally concerned about China today. And I think that what we have to do is to stop these India-China comparisons too much because China today is like 4 to 5 times richer than we are. They're a different plane. So to compare India and China to me is completely misleading. These countries have nothing in common apart from the large populations. They're very different societies, very different structures, and China today has very different problems because its per capita income today is nearly $7,000. We're at $1,500. We're where China used to be 15 years ago. So the roadmap for India and what India needs to do is very different from what China needs to do. So I'd say these comparisons are nice to make, but really have no economic basis according to me. And that's been my problem with this whole BRIC concept as well. They're very different economies with very different agendas. And to sort of compare them, therefore, is not fair. And I think that's the issue I have with the India-China comparison as well.
The evening came to a close with managing partner Positive Moves Consulting, Praveen Malhotra, delivering the closing address.
So taking a cue from the title of this very insightful and fascinating book, I would like to introduce to you the concept of Breakout Indian. Is it a coincidence that there are more Indians in boardrooms and corner offices of corporations globally? Rakesh Kapoor at Reckitt Benckiser, Indra Nooyi at Pepsi, Anshu Jain at Deutsche Bank. Two of our distinguished guests, both Shiv and Ruchir themselves, are a testimony of this fact. So something must be right. It's not just the corporates, but also deans of some of the best business schools, Harvard, Chicago, INSEAD, they're all Indians. By one estimate, in a study done recently, Indians account for almost 15% of the global executive workforce. It's a well-known fact that over the last few decades, MNCs across sectors have leveraged their presence in India to build global Indian talent pools. So what is it about Indians that make us successful globally? I guess high IQ, global mindset which enables us to work across diverse market and cultures, and our capability to adapt to the rapidly changing business environment differentiates Indian talent. On behalf of Positive Moves team, I would like to thank Ruchir and Shiv for sharing deep insights and for making our 20-year celebration extremely special and memorable. Thank you Shiv, thank you Ruchir, thank you very much.
The Positive Moves Where Will the Money Go forum succeeded in answering key questions about India's growth trajectory, strategy and development. An evening to share ideas and analyze the rise of emerging markets.